why the world owes the English a thank you.
And I think one of the great problems for the English is that they have an identity crisis because the very best elements of Englishness, England's greatest achievements, have been woven up into the British national fabric. The two most influential figures in human history after Jesus Christ, and that's Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin.
I wanted to explore why the world owes the English a thank you. Now, I'm not a historian, you're a recognized historian. But some of the things I can come up with would be ending the transatlantic slave trade, creating the modern world, the Industrial Revolution. We discovered so much science in this country, so much medicine. And compared to other countries across the world, I look at it and go, wow, we're special. Is that just me being an Anglophile? Is that just me exaggerating the impact of this country? Or is there something to that? Over to you.
England is the greatest country the world has ever seen. One of the two great countries of the world, the other one being what we now call modern Italy. Italy is a very modern creation, but the Italian states. But if you look at Italy and England, no two other countries have done more to create the world around us, but also to lift up humanity, not just in terms of Western civilization, in terms of the English, but also with the Italians, globally. But with the Italians, of course, they laid the foundations, not only, of course, with ancient Roman civilization, but then, of course, through the Renaissance, through art, architecture, of course, hugely influential, our notions of beauty, which are, of course, fundamentally important to the soul and to the soul of both the individual and of civilization, but also in terms of the formation of capitalism. But then England took up that mantle, and actually no country has had a greater impact on the world for good. And, I often like to say that there are essentially 10 areas in which Britain can say, well, let's say England, because when we say Britain, in essence, what we're really talking about is England. The British Constitution, it's really the English Constitution that the Scots subscribed to, essentially, that they became incorporated into. And I think one of the great problems for the English is that they have an identity crisis because the very best elements of Englishness, England's greatest achievements, have been woven up into the British national fabric. And I often say, if you go on Wikipedia, for example, and you look up some great inventors or great figures from Britain, if they're Scottish, it will say Scottish inventor. If they're English, it will say British inventor. So it's almost as if the English, who are the great success story of these islands, have been denied their own inheritance and their own source of pride. We see a lot of Celtic nationalism with the Scots and the Welsh being able to wave their flags with great gusto, and that's called progressive nationalism. When the English do it, it's racist, and I think it's high time that the English reclaimed their identity, and that means taking pride in some of the things that I'm going to tell you now, which are the top 10 for me are, yes, you already mentioned one, the Industrial Revolution. We'll go into all these in depth later on, but the Industrial Revolution. Number 2 is the creation of the railways and modern public mass transit as we understand it today, both in the city level and globally, which shrank the world. Parliamentary democracy spreading around the globe. Capitalism, we didn't invent that. As I said, that was an Italian invention, and then the Dutch put steroids on it, but nobody did more to spread capitalism around the world than the British. And then English liberty. And English liberty is very different to Greco-Roman concepts of liberty, is different to continental types of liberty. English liberty has probably been, many would argue, perhaps our greatest contribution to the world in philosophical notions, especially with this idea of the rights of Englishmen. The English language, which we ironically call the lingua franca, I think it should be called the lingua anglia now. Finally, we have a global language. People try to create Esperanto in an attempt to create a global language. We have it through the beauty of our simplistic English language. The common law legal system is another hugely important one. Then the British Empire. The British Empire, fundamentally important in shaping the world as we know it, which led to things like the abolition of slavery, along with many other abhorrent practices, but also led to the development of the world and the spreading of many of these great gifts of England that I've already mentioned. Then English Protestantism, so your Anglicanism, Methodism, Quakerism, the Salvation Army. English Protestantism was hugely important in shaping notions of the individual. The most individualistic nations in the world are the Anglosphere nations: America, Canada, Australia, the UK, and New Zealand. Those are the most individualistic countries in the world. And a lot of the success and genius of the Anglosphere nations comes from English Protestantism, which we can also get into later. And then, of course, finally, I would say something which we often forget, and that's sport. The notion of sport, essentially the majority, almost every single modern sport of today that one can think of was an English creation, with the exception of golf and curling, which of course come from the Scots. And it's quite remarkable. And of course, these sports have now become global phenomenon. They unite the world, and sport is one of the great things that brings the people of a nation together, forges social cohesion around the world. And that's another aspect of England's global inheritance, or for which we can all take pride in. And those are the top 10, I would say, pillars of England's great gift to the world. And I don't think any other country can come close to matching that sort of great legacy. And then further from that, we can also look and see who are the figures in England's history that we can look to as being truly significant on a global level. And I would say that England can lay claim to the two most influential figures in human history after Jesus Christ, and that's Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. Newton, of course, a key figure in the scientific revolution, with his Principia Mathematica, of course, hugely important book in which he unified physics and classical mechanics and formulated the laws we know about gravity and motion and all of that, which stayed in place until Einstein's theory of relativity. And really, Newton created the scientific method by which the whole world has been improved. And of course, Charles Darwin, one of the great figures in human history, who of course developed this whole concept of the evolution of the species and survival of the fittest and all of that. So, those are the two greatest figures after Jesus Christ who shaped the world. Then you get, just a step down from that, other completely fascinating and fundamental global figures, people like John Maynard Keynes for economics, with state intervention, concepts of economics from Keynes, which became globally significant. I mean, I think his works probably are the most famous works in economics are his, whether you agree with them or not. The General Theory of Employment, the book he wrote there. Then Locke, of course, the very notion of classical liberalism that the world understands, he gave birth to that, the concept that, each man has a right to life, liberty, and property, that the government mustn't interfere with those rights, that essentially governments govern with the consent of the people, and therefore the authority of government derives from the people, from the ground up. And finally, who's left? Oh yes, Edmund Burke, and the idea of traditional conservatism. So Locke on the liberal side, Burke on the conservative side, and here's our concept of traditional conservatism, which shapes conservatism around the world: respect for institutions and tradition, in essentially guiding society and guiding people, and being opposed to radicalism, and essentially understanding that the society develops organically, not through revolution and so forth. So taken together, I think that's a pretty potent and compelling argument for England being the greatest nation we've been.
Well, you're going to get no argument from me, Rafe, no argument whatsoever. So you've just backed up my instincts, my thoughts, and my limited reading on the history of this island.